A report by the UN and European Union estimates that it will take $71 billion to rebuild Gaza. About a third of that is needed just to restore essential services destroyed by Israel's war. So, how will Gaza be rebuilt and who'll pay? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. More than 2 years of relentless Israeli attacks have decimated much of Gaza. The scale of the destruction is unimaginable. Places that were once home to vibrant communities are today mountains of rubble, and buried underneath are unexploded bombs, toxic chemicals from weaponry, and the unrecovered remains of thousands of Palestinians killed in Israel's genocide. A joint United Nations European Union report says that it will cost more than $71 billion over 10 years to return Gaza to a place where people can live. The sums involved are gargantuan, about the annual GDP of a country like Oman or Luxembourg. The political challenges to making it happen are equally immense. So, can the report's vision of reconstruction be realized? And who'll pay? And how does it fit with the plans of US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace? We'll discuss all of that with our guests shortly, but first a report from Felix Naiwara.
Israel's genocidal war has transformed Gaza into a wasteland of death and debris. The United Nations says it will take at least 15 years to clear almost 60 million metric tons of rubble. Analysts warn it may take much longer. The full extent of destruction can only be determined when international inspectors are given full access to the territory. The UN, the World Bank, and the European Union have published a report on what will be needed for post-war recovery. It says $71 billion over the next 10 years will only mark the beginning. The report estimates the destruction caused more than $35 billion in physical damage. Disruptions to economic and social life led to about $22 billion in losses. More than 60% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed, and that has displaced at least 1.9 million people. The report also says the genocide in Gaza has effectively wiped out entire sectors of society. Education is among the worst affected areas. 728,000 children are unable to go to school because of Israel's war. Less than half of Gaza's healthcare facilities are functional, but even those aren't fully operational. $1.7 billion in damage has been done to Gaza's water and sanitation facilities, and $10.5 billion will be needed to revive agriculture. The report says these areas are top priorities for post-war recovery. It highlights the daunting reality and overwhelming struggle Palestinians face daily in Gaza. While humanitarian relief trickles in, the quantities allowed fall far below the need. The UN says Israel's destruction has set back human development in the Gaza Strip by 77 years. Felix Naiwara, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Joining us now from Al Zawaida in Gaza is Ahmed Muin Abu Amsha, who's a music teacher there. Good to have you with us, Ahmed. Give us a sense of what daily life is like right now in Gaza. What are the challenges that you face on a daily basis?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's not easy right now to have a good water, to have a good food, to have a good shelter. Until now, we stuck in the middle. Nobody is asking about us, and nothing moves since the war of Iran until now. Gaza, like everybody forget about it. Until now, we're facing a lot of things. It's not easy to get to minimum life.
Ahmed, you're a fit, reasonably healthy man. What about the sick and infirm, the elderly, babies, nursing mothers and infants? How do they get by?
Okay, I will tell you about all the facilities of the hospitals, the schools are destroyed. Now there's a point for doctors. They help the people, the kids, and they have a lot of problems with medicine. It's not exist, and they try just to give them a painkiller. Yesterday, I take my son. He has a heat and he's a flu. Only they give him a painkiller. That's it. So yeah, it's very hard for everyone in Gaza. The the kids, the older men. It's not a life, really. It's need a lot. Gaza needs a lot of support and help to get back to a minimum life.
Ahmed, what about basic necessities such as drinking water and bathing water, toilets? Is there a functioning sewage system right now in Gaza?
It's all destroyed. You know, there's some places like have a water grid, and it's only come one day, 6 hours in the day, and you have to be hurry to fill your tanks because you know the fuel does not exist. Even it's very hard to get fuel. It's very expensive, and you know there's no electric, so they use a solar panel to generate the water pumps and yeah, until now it's hard, and no, the border is closed for a solar system, for mobiles, for everything that can help Gaza until now. Everything is closed.
What about food? Are there shops from which to buy food? And money? Where do people get money to buy food?
Okay, it's a long story, really. The food exists right now. It's a little bit better. You know, before that there was a genocide, and there was starving, and there's no food. I was buying the packet of flour $1,500 only for one packet, 25 kilos. Now everything exists, but it's very expensive. It's not easy to get. You have to, about the money, you know, there's no banks. It's only you have the money from the black market, or you can buy at the mobile app. Easy to get cash. And right now, all the people in Gaza trying to deal with an app bank.
And what about shelter? Where are people living? Where are people sleeping right now? I know that the buildings that are still standing, most of them are extensively damaged and dangerous. Where are people laying their heads at night?
You know, there's not a specific shelter for the people here. The people live in the street, beside the street, beside the left and the right. They build their tents and live there. There's no enough space. You know, a lot of displacing people in the middle of Gaza City, because there is some places are still standing and still working, and there's water. But you know, North Gaza, nothing remains. So it's it's no enough space for all the displacing people from north and from Rafah to have them. So I'm living now in the seaside, on the beach, in the sand. I built my tents and my activity there with Edward Said Conservatory, because we don't have choices.
Ahmed, really appreciate you coming on to talk to us today. Many thanks indeed. Ahmed Muin Abu Amsha there in Gaza.
Thank you so much.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Xavier Abu Eid, who's a political analyst and former communications director for the Palestine Liberation Organization. In Berlin is Sultan Barakat. He's a professor of public policy at Hamad Bin Khalifa University and a specialist in post-conflict reconstruction. And also in Ramallah is Raja Khalidi. He is the former Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Raja, let's start with you. You heard what Ahmed was saying there from Gaza. The UN, the EU and the World Bank put this reconstruction bill at something like $71 billion over a decade. Are those numbers credible? Is it going to be enough? Is it just a partial picture of the damage?
Yeah, so as former Director General of the Research Institute, we followed this from the beginning. And clearly the numbers today that have been released, the 72 billion, 71 point something billion, are well established. If you look at the report, of course, it has extraordinary detail. Very well. It's the best that can be done without actually going around Gaza and counting. But anyhow, it's a 50% more than the first estimate, which was for the first 12 months of the war, and this is now 24 months. And one can add to that the fact that since the October ceasefire, destruction has continued, etc. So my point is that this is definitely the best we're going to get, that all we need, in fact. We're talking about total losses, total damages, and needs. And in those three categories, the report has done an excellent job. And in fact, taken it forward because they've now given us timeframes for how much we'll need in each of these periods. And I think this is something often missing from this discussion. When we talk about 72 billion, oh my God, where are you going to get 72 billion? To be honest, the report is very clear about the first 8 months and the first 18 months. And those in those first 18 months, the actual needs are less than 20 billion. Assuming everything was available. And of that, a lot of it, to be honest, and if not most of it, is relief. Relief, shelter, the things that Ahmed so eloquently told us about, the basics that nobody really is talking about when talking about reconstruction. So I think this is a bit of a, it's important to bring it down to the ground and think realistically. What do we need in the next eight months? What do we need in the next year and a half? And then talk about these grandiose visions for reconstruction, regardless of who's behind them. So this is the priority: relief, shelter, humanitarian assistance, price stabilization, market stabilization, and then recovery, and then we can talk about reconstruction.
Sultan Barakat, $71 billion, that's a whopping amount of money over a decade. Okay, we're talking about in the shorter term, an amount that's less than that, $20 billion or less. That's still nowhere near what donors have pledged. Who's going to pay?
Okay. Yeah, well, there are two ways of looking at it. One is to think in terms of justice, and if we pursue the route of justice, then of course Israel has got to pay some reparation for the damage it caused in Gaza. Now, this will probably be refused by Israel and by extension the United States, despite the fact that the US has in fact provided Israel with almost $30 billion to conduct its war over the last 2 years. This is in addition to the $3.8 billion they get every year. Now, the assumption, I think, within the US and Israel is that the Arab states will roll up their sleeves, and they will come, as they have done in the past, and pay for it, as will the European Union. Now, because of the way this particular genocide took place, and because of the creation of the Board of Peace, these two willing contributors are not willing anymore. The Europeans have been largely alienated. They did not want to join the Board of Peace. They would like to see different mechanism. They would like it all to be done under the United Nations umbrella, considering the international law and so on. And the Gulf states, who may have been willing to contribute and made some pledges to the Board of Peace, now are in a very difficult position after the Iran war. And I doubt that they will be as willing to come up with the billions that they've promised each. Each Gulf state almost $1 billion to contribute to the reconstruction. So the short answer is that there are no real clear contributors willing to pick up the bill. And this is something I think is very well understood by Netanyahu and his extreme government. They know very well that they're now managed to put 2 million people in a protracted humanitarian situation where they will be only fed in their place of displacement, and the way they've been pushed away from the Israeli borders, cornered in certain areas across the Gaza Strip. This is a situation that they expect them, I think, to stay within for a number of years to come.
Xavier, what are your thoughts on this, particularly on the Board of Peace? The report itself insists that reconstruction must be Palestinian-led. What are your feelings on the involvement of the Board of Peace and who pays?
I think, Adrian, there is an issue of design that it's very complicated to analyze as we stand, because the Board of Peace was not made for Gaza. The Board of Peace is an institution for President Donald Trump. It does not include the stakeholders that are needed for it to operate in Palestine. Now it has kind of two parallel boards, and there is one board for Gaza, and then there is a special coordinator for this to work. And I don't really think that this board is going to be able to operate in Gaza, because it has basically focused on Israeli interests. It has actually even conditioned the entry of humanitarian aid, for example, or the amount of humanitarian aid entering to the disarmament of Hamas. No one is talking about justice. No one is talking about Israel still occupying almost 60% of Gaza. And on the other side, I think it's also another important element is the fact that, this report that you have been talking about, this EU-UN report, it sets several elements that are important for reconstruction to start. And one of them is that more freedom of movement between Gaza, between the West Bank, and between both of them together in within as well, the humanitarian aid to enter, as well as a ceasefire to take place. Well, the three of them are actually conditional to Israel, and I don't really see any power, particularly the US, willing to put the needed pressure for Israel to allow for this to happen.
Roger, Khalidi, I'm sorry, with 60 million tons of rubble, as we were saying in the introduction, and that's going to take years just to clear it. Is there even a realistic pathway to start rebuilding, reconstructing Gaza at scale anytime soon?
Look, the political pathway, I think, will be ultimately decided in the Iran war, in the context of the outcomes of the Iran war, as well as the future of the Board of Peace, which I have no problem trashing. There are all lots of good reasons that it's contravening international law, and, disrupting multilateralism, and all of the other reasons. On the other hand, if a political environment can be created by the Board of Peace, and I think to some extent we've been wanting to give it the benefit of the doubt that if it could perform and provide better humanitarian assistance and bring in the 20,000 caravans that have been waiting at the borders, and regardless of the disarmament issue, if it could achieve that, then whoever can do that, all power to them. That was in some ways I think the Gaza and Palestinian sort of consensus is that we accepted this Board of Peace resolution on the assumption that it was going to deliver what it said it was going to deliver. Now it hasn't. The Iran war has obviously complicated things. But to say that at this moment, I think it's not the right moment for us to abandon the Board of Peace ship, in the sense that it's still guided by United Nations Security Council resolution, and it has one legitimate element, if I may say, which is this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which is legitimate because it's been formed, but with credible people, professionals, but with Palestinian consensus. It's in fact the most legitimate, in some ways, not representative, but legitimate Palestinian administrative body that we have right now. And in that sense, it might be the only remaining last man standing once the Board of Peace is indeed going to be cut down to size, I believe, by the fallout from the war, the financial fallout, and so on and so forth. On the funding issue, let's just quickly remind ourselves. The UN has been able to come up with $3.5 to $4 billion in the last 3 years through the UN. Donors, have provided close to $4 billion in emergency aid for the last couple of years. So there is, the minimal need, which is $3 to $4 billion for basic survival, can be secured. There are other sources. Israel is withholding $6 billion of Palestinian fiscal resources. This is money that would have partially been spent on Gaza. There are other ways we can think of of meeting the funding challenge, but it requires a political horizon, of course. And I don't think Israel, is going to be able to continue blocking this indefinitely. And we have to be ready for the moment that we can have a breakthrough, get this committee into Gaza, get it operating, get the internal security in its hands. These are things that are doable, regardless of all of the problems with the Board of Peace and international law.
Sultan, what are your thoughts on that? The report is clear that without a sustained ceasefire and free movement of goods, reconstruction cannot succeed. How far away right now are those conditions?
Gazans were promised a ceasefire, which has not been sustained. It's been violated repeatedly by Israel ever since the agreement was passed or the UN resolution was passed, and without any cost to Israel. They also were promised a security force, international security force that's going to come and help secure Gaza and help disarm Hamas and all this. That has now not happened, and it's very unlikely now Indonesia will come forward with the force that they've talked about in the past. It's not been resolved. The civilian military coordination center that was created inside Israel is pretty much under the control of Israel. In fact, a few days ago, they expelled the Spanish out of this center because they don't like what Spain stands for. So what has really taken place since the UN resolution is a consolidation of Israel's control over the Palestinians and their destiny in Gaza. And as such, when they are told that they've robbed them out of 77 years of development, they should really be the first to answer for this and how they're going to pay for it, how are they going to support them again. Now, it doesn't mean that the Palestinians have no resources. One obvious resource is natural gas in the sea opposite Gaza, which is a Palestinian right that's now being exploited by Israel in some occasions, in fact, in partnership with other regional countries. But for now, let's just summarize it in the context that the Palestinians are not benefiting from it. So there are resources if the world is focused on Palestinian first, that the reconstruction has got to take into consideration the need for them to sustain their livelihood. They need jobs. You need to create a good 500,000 jobs in the coming few weeks. That doesn't exist, never mind infrastructure and feeding people and everything else. There are hundreds of thousands of young men and women who are sitting unemployed in the Gaza Strip. They need to have the real prospect. The environmental issues have got to be tackled. The only thing that often talked about in the circles of the Board of Peace is the rubble. And you know why? It's because they think they can use it to claim land from the sea, which is going to become a prime coastal area for the development of very expensive flats and towers and hotels and so on. And this is something that the international backers of the board are willing to invest in, but not in the reconstruction of where people should really return to. And until now, Israel has not given the green light for them to return to their homes. And the idea that they could...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sultan, but that's a point that I wanted to put to Xavier. Let's not forget the people of Gaza, nearly 2 million of them displaced. How do you even begin to think about reconstruction without first resolving where people can safely live? If access, security and movement remain restricted, this $71 billion that we're talking about, this plan, it's a pie in the sky, isn't it?
It's also something that Professor Barakat just highlighted, that has not been granted to people in Gaza since the ceasefire, quote unquote, was achieved. But I would also like to address an important point with regards to context, because the interest of Israel to isolate Gaza from the rest of Palestine did not change. The interest of Israel not to have a Palestinian state did not change. And still Israel has a veto right in all this context. So I would say that it's actually very important that we focus on Gaza and the reconstruction in Gaza. They have been going through a genocide, and I would call it even an ongoing genocide. But we should not forget what's happening in the context of Palestine, whereby, for example, President Donald Trump said that he would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. And since that moment, almost 50 new Israeli settlements have been announced here in the occupied West Bank.
Raji, you spoke about what's needed in the short term not being anywhere near the $71 billion that we're talking about. What would success actually look like here, at least in the near term, restoring Gaza perhaps to what it was before October 2023? Are we talking about something completely different? And how quickly can things move?
Well, the 10-year time frame that's provided in this report is, I think, a reasonable one, and that's a time frame which is assuming access. Of course, is Israel is out of Gaza, of course, but more importantly, or no less important, is that access of goods and building and the required reconstruction material is eventually, smoothly entering. Under those conditions, and under a financing scheme of, 4 to 5 billion, 6 maybe a year, including, this is, we should not forget, including Palestinian resources. I mean, Palestinian private sector resources, investment, etc., expatriate, Palestinian expatriate community investments. As long as there's a political context for such a process, it can be, the residential construction alone requirements, reconstruction needs, I think, are 30 billion out of the 70. Now, that's over 10 years or 7 years, 6 years. It's not so, that's not an unbelievable amount, and it's not either. I mean, the rubble, the removal of ordnance, all of those things could proceed at the same time as you're setting up temporary communities, shelter communities, at the same time as you're starting to rehabilitate utilities and so on and so forth. So it doesn't need to be sequential.
I'm sorry,
but the point is that
I'm sorry to cut you short.
That it not be done within the vision of the Riviera. That it be done actually as a Palestinian.
I'm sorry to cut you short, Sultan Barakat. We have less than a minute left, Professor. I mean, please pick up on what Raja was saying there. And are you optimistic or pessimistic that we'll get anywhere near reconstructing Gaza anytime soon?
Well, the very little optimism that kind of risen in the aftermath of the ceasefire has now disappeared when we saw the way Israel managed to lead the United States into another adventure in the region that has really got Gaza out of the media and also has normalized the level of killing that took place in Gaza. So I'm not really optimistic of what's going on. I think, again, without a serious political resolution to the issue, without a serious end of occupation, nothing is going to change much. And Israelis will also come to learn that the same people that have risen against them will rise again. In fact, their children now have twice the reason to revenge, to demand their freedom and so on. So it hasn't really addressed the issue of security, not for the Palestinians and not for the Israelis.
Gentlemen, there, I'm afraid we must end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us today. Xavier Abu Eid, Sultan Barakat and Raja Khalidi. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Al Jazeera's live coverage continues in just a moment.